Welcome to the Kathleen Project, capturing Manchester's industrial past. The voices you will hear in this series will tell you of their experience working in Manchester's 20th century garment industry. In this episode, Maureen talks about her connection to Manchester's garment industry through her great-grandmother, Elizabeth, her aunt, Edna, and her time working in the office of a factory making t-shirts and jeans for Marks & Spencer's and Littlewoods.
I was born in 1936. When I was just over 3, obviously war broke out, and my father was conscripted into the army. My mother found it difficult because army pay was apparently very poor at that time, so she needed to work and she couldn't really afford the rent anyway. So she went back to live with my grandmother in Hume and my aunt, who also was still at home. She hadn't married at that point. So I had spent my early years in Hume, just off Jackson Street. My grandmother told me that, because of course she looked after me because my mother went out to work, that my grandfather's parents had 2 businesses, both in Hume. One a dressmaking business, which was my great-grandmother's, and he was a builder. And I did find an advertisement for Holcroft's dressmakers, and they were advertised as making costumes and skirts. I would imagine, certainly in the early days, she relied on her family to a certain extent. She had numerous daughters. Certainly 3 of them worked for her. One worked for the post office. She obviously escaped. But I did find advertisements for staff for them, for machinists. And the number of times that the advertisements appeared, every day they were advertising, or every other day, over a couple of weeks, made me think that either the business was booming or they were bad employers. And my instinct is bad employers. It closed in around about the 1930s, the business. How and why, I don't know. I mean, she died by then. Her daughters were running it. Interestingly, Elizabeth died in the workhouse. After her husband died, she's in the next census as being a pensioner. And then she next appears in the workhouse in Manchester, where she died. But having said that, workhouses were used in a sense like hospices. She could have been put in there because she was dying, I don't know. My aunt was a dressmaker. The aunt I lived with made my clothes until she died, basically, and her own and everybody else's in the family. She was a brilliant needlewoman, but was taken into war work and had to do, she went to work, I think it was AV Row, but I'm not sure, making pilots' suits, which was quite a thing for her because she'd worked on very fine work. She was a brilliant needlewoman, and she did all the samples for the company she worked for, making beautiful ornate blouses and that sort of thing in very fine fabrics, and was put on making these pilot suits. And I can remember her hands were always sore because it was such hard,
Rough fabric as
very,
well. Kind of,
yeah, it's like canvas. And she used to bring, because they had to turn out so many suits per day, she was always behind because it was, she wasn't used to it. So she used to bring home piles of pockets, which had to be turned. And I must have only been probably six-ish. Because I had little fingers, I used to do the little ones. And we used to sit at night listening to the radio, turning these pockets, what seemed like endlessly to me. I know when my aunt worked in dressmaking in a factory until she was in her 70s. And she was born in 1908. So we're talking about 1978. She was paid a pittance, an absolute pittance. Because I can remember at one point, probably in the 60s, early 60s, they were making girls' gabardine raincoats, you know, with the belts and the hoods. And she got something like £0.50 per garment, you know. It was a pittance, which was why I didn't become a dressmaker. Although I've always been interested in sewing, was making things when I was this big, because they did. When it came to wanting a career, I wanted to be a dressmaker, and they pleaded with me not to because of the pay and the sweatshop conditions. And my aunt bought me my first sewing machine when I was 14, on the understanding that I would give an office job a try. When my children were young, I did all sorts of jobs to fit in with them, basically. And I worked for a company in going down Dane Road. The station's on one side, and there's a little road down. There's a little industrial estate down there, which I didn't know till I went for this job. And they made T-shirts and jeans for Marks and Spencer's and Littlewoods. And that would be in the 1970s.
Can you remember the name of that company?
Oh, I didn't stay very long. I worked in the office, so I had very little to do with that.
So how many people worked at this particular company, can you remember?
Oh, they had a machine shop, obviously, where there was a cutter, dressmaker, well, machinist. I'd like to see textiles come back into this country, and I'd certainly like to see it locally, because we've got such a heritage of it in this area. But not if we're being made to work for nothing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Kathleen Project. The project is brought to you by Stitched Up and supported by Historic England. For more information, please contact Stitched Up at hello@stitchedup.coop or on Instagram or Facebook @stitchedupcoop.